you spoke about how as psychologists we're used to, or therapists, we're used to managing power within the relationship, within the room. And what we're saying here is it's like multiplied by the fact that there's this international system which places pressure downward in certain ways. So the pressure to see certain numbers of people is on the managers, who then put pressure on the practitioners, and then the practitioners have to do what is driven by the donor rather than what comes up from the community. And so that kind of puts the kind of relationship dynamics that we're used to dealing with, it's multiplied and it's much more intense. And then there's the cross-cultural element where there might be certain systems of hierarchy within the culture that you're working in where it might not be appropriate to express dissent from what someone in a higher position than you was saying. And then there's this I guess system of coloniality as well, which often places people from countries like Australia in an unquestioned hierarchy, even though the people in the local context are the people who have the contextual knowledge, which is what's really needed to do effective work. But it means that it can be very difficult to manage those dynamics if, as an Australian, you're used to a much more informal way of communicating, where it's normal to say, ask people for feedback and expect them to tell you if there's something wrong.
Absolutely. And I suppose we're in a context where, I mean, for the most part, Western-based interventions for psychological malaise are understood. I mean, talk-based therapies, for the most part, is understood within our, socialized within our environment, I guess. But in the context of the Rohingya, it's not. There isn't any. There's no history of, talk-based psychotherapeutic interventions. So then you have the complexity of, around, there is the expectation from the Bangladeshi practitioners that this is what they're supposed to do, but then also convincing a community that has no understanding of that, right? So, marketing one's services to a community that might not necessarily understand what they're coming for in the first place, right? So this raises questions around consent, but then at the same time, you have the practitioners who are tasked with doing something, and their performance will be based on their ability to be able to achieve their KPIs, right? So there are a few complexities around that. So it's a big challenge. But then you have, of course, mentioning the multi layers of privilege or whatnot, and I suppose for the most part, and this is where you're talking about neocolonialism and whatnot, but for the most part they've had this concept modeled, right, whereby there's an outside expert who's coming in, right, and usually from the global north, someone who's educated, blah blah blah, right, who's coming in with a certain expertise to give to individuals, right? Well, in a context like this, the Bangladeshis might view themselves in the same way that they view the Western practitioner, how they might view themselves vis-a-vis the refugee community, right? But they might not have yet those skills, right, in order to provide the refugee community, right, with, I suppose, the same the same expertise which they've perceived as others coming to give to them, right? And so it's a form of, I guess, it's a form of neocolonialism. I mean, I suppose it might manifest itself in the the clinical supervision space. There might really be an interest in real passion to learn more skills, right? In order to generally be that expert, right? That they've seen others as experts, as psychologists, as mental health experts, right? Whereas, the community, it might not mean anything to the community, those. And so how do you navigate a space whereby people really want to become experts and really want, to improve their therapeutic chops, and in meeting a community that might not necessarily have any understanding? So I suppose there's an interplay between, wanting to provide practitioners with those skills, but also, encouraging, having a lens of being client focused and wanting to, I suppose, wanting to be inquisitive in terms of what is it that the community has done to survive, right? Because they've survived, not just in Bangladesh, but in Syria and other contexts which we're working with. They've survived some of the most difficult circumstances imaginable, right? So clearly they have,